Hey, you're listening to the Riverdale podcast. This is episode number 85. My name is Jonathan. Welcome to lovely Riverdale, USA. This is a weekly Archie Comics fan podcast. We update every Saturday morning, and every week we break things down into 4 categories. The first category is the book of the week. That's the comic book I read this week. Sometimes it's a new comic book, sometimes it's an old comic book, but it's always an Archie comic book. We move then to the news of the week. That's what happened in the world of Archie in the week since our last podcast. And then on to new releases. That's what came out this past Wednesday. Will be coming up this coming Wednesday from Archie. And wrapping things up today, exciting stuff. We got a couple of guests waiting in the wings to talk about the new Sabrina animated series that debuted last weekend on the 12th. And we've got friend of the show, John Troughton, on to talk about it. And also Johanna Draper-Carlson from comicsworthreading.com. Both big Archie fans. Excited to have that talk. It's going to be full of spoilers, guys. If you haven't watched the show and you want to watch the show, you might want to skip that last part. We are going to get pretty heavily into plot points on that. But that is what the show looks like this week. Stick around. Let's get on to the book of the week. All right, book of the week. Last week, of course, we talked about Afterlife with Archie, the new horror series coming from Archie. And this week, I wanted to talk about another horror series that came from Archie. This week's book of the week is Madhouse number 96. Now, this bears a little bit of explaining, and I had to do a little detective work to figure this out, too. But I was at a convention last spring, and I found this issue, Madhouse number 96. It's got the Red Circle Comics Group tag across the top, and it has a picture of a very mystical sort of scene of a topless lady with a long green skirt, some skulls with candles on them, and a gigantic purple demon in the background. There's an illustration by Gray Morrow, classic comic illustrator. I'm not hugely familiar with his work. I noticed the name recognized the name as soon as I saw it. And the Madhouse logo is three-dimensionally rendered. Looks like it's a sort of old brick castle sort of thing. Head over to RiverdalePodcast.com and check out the cover for this comic book. It's amazing. So we're going to talk a little bit about this comic. Like, what is going on with it? Of course, the history of Madhouse goes back to the 60s when it was a humor title that was meant to be to feature some of the Archie characters and be sort of a counter to Mad Magazine, to do their sort of surreal, spoofy, strange humor. Definitely not necessarily teen humor, that sort of surreal, over-the-top kind of humor. I guess I'm explaining it poorly. But this was a total 180 from that. This is a book that contains a number of stories, 4 stories, I believe. And it's almost like an old EC comic. We'll go through and we'll talk about the stories. And I had to go looking for some info on this. I turned to my bookshelves. I have the great Best of Archie's Madhouse by Craig Yo. And in the introduction, thankfully, he explains that there were 3 issues of Madhouse. This particular issue is number 96, as I said, dated November 1974. Apparently, there was a big 180 that was taken for issues 95, 96, and 97 of the Madhouse book. And promptly, with issue 98, they went back to the humor stuff, and they completely abandoned this take on the Madhouse book. But I thought, with everyone talking about Afterlife with Archie being the horror book and being a huge left turn for Archie Comics and all that, I thought I had this immediately in the back of my head. I said, well, let's talk about this week, because it certainly isn't the first time that Archie's done crazy stuff, but this was short-lived, and it's a real oddity in the history of Archie Comics. As I explained, we have a crazy, crazy scene going on the cover. The first story, getting into the guts of the book, is Never Bother a Dead Man. This was written by Marvin Channing and drawn by Jesse Santos. This is a story of a mortician who's being hassled by some street thugs, and the body that he's currently working on comes to life and dispatches with the street thugs. It's really amazing. There is a brief one-page essays into the supernatural that tells you a bit about clairvoyance and people talking to the dead and things like that. We have a story that is based on the cover, or the cover is based on it. It is certainly the story that the cover image is alluding to, about a woman who actually sells her soul to the devil in order to become a movie star. And there's a really intense scene where that big purple demon that you see on the cover rises up out of hell, and there are these terrifying, like ghastly, gigantic, frowning faces behind him, like crying as he laughs and like rises up out of flames and smoke and probably clouds of sulfur and whatnot. And after she makes her deal with the devil, she has to find a stranger to kiss. This was the deal set up by the devil. She would die at the end of that year unless she kissed a stranger, and her kiss would put that curse off onto him. Or her, I guess, in this instance, him. And there's a great twist on this. She kisses this man, and this man becomes obsessed with her and really makes her life difficult. And there's a great twist ending, an O. Henry-style ending, where she definitely gets what she deserves, perhaps, for playing with fire. A similar story is the next one, in which this woman, who is part of a coven of witches, turns on her fellow witches to bring her lover back from the dead. Again, a twist ending. This is very much like all of the EC comics, or what we associate with EC comics, about people making like poor moral decisions and then having this terrible thing happen to them at the end. And the exception to that is the second story, called The Gentlest Dog on the Block. And this is a story with no real moral compass whatsoever. This was actually kind of haunting. I just read this in my dark house, and I'm a little unsettled, to be honest. In this story, this man's dog upsets this fortune teller. He is at the fair or the carnival or what have you, and his dog runs into the fortune teller tent and upsets the fortune teller. And the fortune teller curses the dog, and the dog kills its masters by pushing them down the stairs. Pushes one down the stairs, and then the man is left to grieve for his wife until he comes back from the funeral and is thrown down the stairs by the dog. And then there's a really chilling final panel where the police are trying to make heads or tails of what has become of these people, and they've both died by the same means, falling down the same flight of stairs, and they're deciding what to do with the dog, which is left behind. And the last panel is the dog deciding to the police officer deciding to give the dog to his son, which is just horrifying. It's really, really spooky stuff. So I would love to know just exactly what happened that made them decide to take this crazy switch up with the madhouse title, it certainly seems reasonable that they would switch back. That doesn't seem entirely crazy. But the fact that they decided after, I guess, almost 10 years, this is issue 96, they're quite a ways into the run and decided to switch things up. I'm really curious about what that is. But in any event, I'm really excited to try to track down 95 and 97 and get the full story, or maybe even the issues on either side of that, and see if there's any sort of editorial sort of explanation as to the switch up in the style of the book. But a real oddity in the history of Archie comics certainly proves that Archie has done some cryptic stuff in the past. In a great read in the October month leading up to Halloween, cool stuff. That is our book of the week, Madhouse number 96. All right, news this week, Archie news this week. Back on the 17th of this month, just a few days ago, we celebrated Glad Spirit Day. It's a day centered around LGBT youth, and it's an anti-bullying campaign day in which folks are encouraged to wear purple to show solidarity towards LGBT youth and to stop bullying of all kinds, but specifically bullying targeted at gay, lesbian, bi, and trans folks. We talked a few weeks ago about the fact that Kevin Keller was chosen to be an ambassador. Sort of a cool thing, for sure. And this week, there are a couple stories that came out over on glad.org. We had a brief, like, one-page comic that Dan Parent drew up for that. That was pretty rad. They also interviewed Dan Parent over on the Glad YouTube page. Certainly cool. It seems like, Dan Parent created this character, and it's certainly, it's got this huge life now. Kevin Keller has been more successful than anyone could have really imagined or hoped for. And good on Dan Parent for being, the straight guy that created the gay character, who now has this sort of responsibility on his shoulders to do these things. I think it's rad that he's stepping up and doing a great job at being a visible figure in this scene. I think it's maybe more than he thought he was biting off when he created the character. But good on him. Great job, Dan Parent. Kevin Keller is a Spirit Day ambassador. How cool is that? Also, that same day over on usatoday.com, we got the premiere of the superhero version of Kevin Keller, just as we have Super Teen and Pure Heart the Powerful and Captain Hero. I'm spacing. What a mess. Just as we have all of those superhero counterparts for the Riverdale gang, this was the premiere of the cover art, and there's a little concept, sort of like turnaround piece of art that Dan Parent had put together of Kevin Keller's superhero alter ego, the Equalizer. He's got a big equal sign on his chest. Otherwise, a black costume. Looks cool. We're going to have to wait till May to see that. That's going to be the storyline in Kevin Keller number 14. But cool. Good time to premiere that. But we can pretty much put it out of our minds because we won't see it again until solicits come out early next year. And we'll read the story in May. But that's cool. We discussed last week that Afterlife with Archie number 1 had sold out. Archie, I told you guys last week that we would probably, definitely, totally see a reprint of that, and that has been announced. There will be a reprint coming out. They didn't give an exact date for when it was going to be released. It had a date of November on it. So I would or rather had a date of December on it. So I would assume we would see that soon, but it has been officially announced we will get a second printing. A brand new Francesco Francavilla cover on that one, a really nice one. So that's cool. That's been announced. That came out this week over on afterlifewitharchie.com. And the big news that came out of New York Comic Con, this is something that was hinted at when I talked to Dan Parent a few weeks ago at the Granite State Con. I sort of drew some conclusions, and it seems like the conclusions that I drew were, in fact, true. But what is coming up in the Betty and Veronica book is that Betty and Veronica are leaving Riverdale. This was the big headline that was announced by first Bleeding Cool, and subsequently a bunch of other news sites picked this up. You won't have a hard time finding some news about this. The storyline coming up is written by Michael Uslan, drawn by Dan Parent, and it's the story of Betty and Veronica becoming exchange students and going to a foreign country. And within that storyline, we're going to follow Betty and Veronica in their lives in a foreign country, and then we're going to go back and forth between them and the folks in Riverdale. And apparently, within the storyline, two new female characters are introduced to sort of fill that void. So it sounds like an interesting story, and it seems like it is, in fact, the storyline that was prepared for the abandoned Veronica and Betty magazine a few years back. So I'm excited. I was excited about that magazine to come out, and since we're going to get the story coming up, I'm thrilled about that. I'm really excited to have the Riverdale gang, I mean, if not physically back in Riverdale, to have them outside of these fairy tale stories or the various other things that they've been doing. It'll be nice to have them as themselves doing their thing in their own sort of proper motivation, as opposed to seeing them cast as various other fictional characters as we have over the last year or so. So I'm super excited about that. And that is the news of the week. We've got Kevin Keller as the ambassador, as one of the ambassadors of Spirit Day. We have the premiere of The Equalizer. We have the second printing of Afterlife with Archie, #1, and we've got Betty and Veronica leaving Riverdale next year. If you head over to RiverdalePodcast.com, you'll find links to all of those stories. You'll definitely want to check them out. All right, new releases, you guys. Last week, as you'll recall, I hemmed and hawed and tried to figure out what was actually coming out from Archie this past Wednesday. And the answer is 0. We get 0 things shipped from Archie this week, this past Wednesday, the 16th of October, which means that next week is going to be an avalanche. Next week, the 23rd of October, the new releases are as follows. Archie and Friends Double Digest #32 for $3.99. Betty and Veronica #268 for $2.99. That is the Reggie Stillskin story. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But there's a terrific variant cover I want you guys to be aware of by Stephanie Buscema. It's beautiful. So when you go to the shop, look around. See if you can't find that variant cover. It looks wonderful. Also coming out this coming Wednesday on the 23rd, we're going to have Betty and Veronica Friends Double Digest #236 for $3.99. Mega Man #30 for $2.99. Sonic Universe #57 for $2.99. I told you this was a big week. World of Archie Double Digest #33 for $3.99. Archie the Married Life Volume 4. That is a 1999 trade paperback. And finally, next week we should be seeing the Betty and Veronica Princess Storybook. Now, we talked about this last week. I had said that I had seen a printed version that didn't include the Reggie Stillskin story. I got an email from a listener, Eric, who got to the bottom of this. He received his copy of the trade paperback straight from Archie, and it had all of those stories, including Reggie Stillskin. So, forget all the rumors, forget all the stuff I said last week. It seems like those 5 stories are in the trade paperback, and it is coming out that week, despite the fact that we are also getting the final issue that's collected in that trade coming up this Wednesday. So if that wasn't confusing enough, there is now no confusion. The Betty Veronica Princess Storybook, $9.99 trade paperback, collects all 5 of those great Storybook Princess issues. We also have a big week this week of digital exclusives over at the Digital Comics app and over at digital.archiecomics.com. You're going to find 3 new exclusives this week. Tales Calculated to Drive You Bats. This was a interesting 60s series. A lot of that stuff has been collected recently in the digest, the Double Digest. This is actually a spin-off of the Madhouse series. But you are going to get 50 pages, more than 50 pages, in that digital exclusive of Tales Calculated to Drive You Bats for $2.99. Also this week, Archie Halloween Blowout number 2. This is Rise of the Monsters. This is another 100-page digital exclusive of Halloween stories, and specifically monster stories, for $3.99. Also, we get a collection of Archie's Madhouse. Bunch of stories there, 100-plus pages, another 100-page exclusive for $3.99. So, if you want the exact opposite of what our book of the week was with Madhouse number 96, go back and read those classic Madhouse stories. Totally rad. Those are your new releases for this past Wednesday the 16th, this coming Wednesday the 23rd, and your digital releases of the week from Archie Comics. So this past Saturday morning, we got the premiere of Sabrina, Secrets of a Teenage Witch, a brand new series on the Hub Network. It's a co-production between Archie Comics and Moonscoop Productions. And here to talk about the first episode with me are a couple of guests. First, we have Johanna Draper-Carlson, the one of the minds behind comicsworthreading.com. Welcome to the show, Johanna.
Thanks for having me.
Also, friend of the show, prior guest of the show, John Troughton. Welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Cool. Hopefully all of our voices are unique and different, and everyone can follow along with us. Let's talk first about maybe a little bit of our expectations going into the show, but mostly if we could go around and just talk a little bit about our experiences with the character of Sabrina and how much of the comics we've read, especially the modern Tanya Del Rio stuff, from which this show draws a lot for sure. John, do you want to start?
Sure. Of a lot of the Archie characters, Sabrina is probably one of the ones I've followed the least consistently. I watched her really old show back in the early 70s, and the one comic book version actually that I've read the most of was actually the Sabrina manga episode or issues, especially the first several. So, and then I guess otherwise a lot of what I've read has been her more recent stuff, like the current one that's in Afterlife with Archie, or the one where she turned everybody into swapped genders on everybody. So I've read a variety of versions of Sabrina in my lifetime.
Cool. Johanna, what's your history with the character of Sabrina?
Well, I didn't read the original Sabrina stuff, although coming to it later, I really liked the design, the original, bouffant hairdo and everything. I read a lot of Sabrina in the 70s as a kid. I've read off and on since then. I tried to watch some of the previous cartoon show and really didn't like that design, very flat, and when she was kind of a kid. I watched the Melissa Joan Hart TV series with the Salem puppet.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I like that.
I read all of Tania Del Rio. I actually have an original sketch by her of Sabrina reading my website, which a friend of mine got for me as a present, which was really cool. So thanks for that, Ed. but yeah, I'm actually I liked the manga approach. I thought it was a perfect choice for the character. I was very disappointed that it took them so long to do reprints, because the way the storylines were going, the reading in bigger chunks was great. I think that series would have done better if they had reprinted it more concurrently when it was running, and in color, because black and white didn't really do it justice, the manga approach. So yeah, I really like the character. She's one of my favorite Archie characters. So yeah, it would be nice to have a better version of her on television right now, which leads into kind of my take on the cartoon show.
Yeah, I've read very little Sabrina. I've scattered issues of the Archie Giant series from the 70s, and I read the first volume of the collected edition, the digest-sized manga edition, as you said, Johanna, in black and white. I didn't like it as much in black and white. I have a lot of scattered issues of that, of the single 32-page issues in color, and I love the way it looked in color. And I thought instead of sticking with the manga volumes, I'd go back and try to fill in those issues, which of course is a little bit of a nightmare at this point.
Yeah, there's not a lot of demand for Archie back issues. We're trying to fill in, my husband and I both like collecting the series, and we're trying to fill in a number of issues from the 60s and 70s. And it's just hard to find anybody that carries them. Yeah,
it's funny because, and not to go off on a total tangent, but with Archie back issues, it's funny because when you find them, they're not particularly expensive, but they seem to be incredibly rare at the same time.
Well, I've been told when people are traveling to conventions, they're bringing what they expect to turn over more quickly, right? So, yeah. I mean, it makes sense. There's not a lot of demand for them, which, as you say, helps keep the prices down, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. So, getting into the series was announced over a year ago now. I guess I believe it was late summer of 2012. I was excited for it. And I wasn't aware of a lot of the stuff that Moonscoop Productions had done. They do a lot of foreign language shows. There's a show called Code Lyoko that I was vaguely aware of, but it's a real 3D rendered style. But let's get into the episode itself. I mean, maybe just going around first impressions. John, what was your impression after watching the first episode?
The artwork is a little different, especially when you look at a lot of the other versions of Sabrina. Sometimes it seemed very wooden, very stiff as far as a lot of the movement, but then other times it didn't quite seem so much so, and so I don't know if that's something that's going to improve upon or not. Some of the takes on some of the characters, some of the voice actors were, especially the aunts, seemed a little, in some ways they were very distinct. You know, with the, what was it? I don't even know. Was that a Brooklyn accent? I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Those were a little different than what I was kind of used to or what I was expecting. Some of the other voice actors, some of the the people from the the Witch World or whatever. Some of those voices seemed a little odd. I thought some of the characters I had no clue who they were, to be honest. That was kind of hard to figure out. It would be nice if they kind of made a little bit more of an effort to say, we knew who Harvey was and Sabrina and all that, but there was I don't even know if they ever said Salem's name, for example. So there's a lot of things like that were kind of a little hard for me to kind of catch up with the first episode, I guess.
Yeah, for me personally, I feel like they had to cover. I mean, maybe they chose to, but there was a lot of ground to cover in this first episode, and it did it compactly for sure, but not necessarily as effectively as I would have hoped. Johanna, how did the first episode go for you?
I'd agree. There was too much going on. I thought the quality was extraordinarily poor. Ugly designs with the oversized heads, the cheap animation looking. The movements were very jerky. Excuse me. Backgrounds were generic. Perspective at one point was so ridiculous that Sabrina looked taller than the lamppost she was standing next to. I found the CGI creepy. the voices I thought were generic. The only one that I recognized was when Salem was doing a bad Paul Lynde impersonation.
Yeah, Paul Lynde. I was thinking about that.
Yeah, the writing was bad. There were sections where the dialogue was clearly trying really hard to be hip, but they were about 5 years out of date or more. I think parents would probably want to know that some of this is in kind of bad taste when she's talking about puking, and her aunt spits in her face at one point, which is meant to be a take on a spit take, but it was not well done. And it's interesting you mentioned the company, because the lip movements were so badly done in some points that I thought, this looks like it was actually dubbed into English from some other language.
Yeah, that's certainly a trend in animation through the last few years, is pooling money and resources and developing shows for multiple markets like that. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I did like the main character, the Sabrina voice. I can't think of her name. Ashley Tisdale. I didn't mind her voice. I of the voices, that's the one probably I liked the most and felt the most natural, I thought, of the group. The Paul Lynde thing was interesting, I thought, the voice. And I don't know if that was like a Bewitched reference or what that was.
No, I think they were just going for kind of, wise-ass relative kind of thing. But I was also put off by the whole, Salem pulls a prank, and as a result, this kid's going to be a werewolf for the rest of his life. That seemed kind of out of scale to me and kind of a poor plot choice.
Yeah, let's try to get into the plot a little bit. I sort of bullet pointed out the episode, but in terms of bullet points, it just goes on forever and ever and ever. But the title of the episode, Dances with Werewolves, it's sort of a tired pun and something that is grossly out of date for the time, for sure. But the episode opens with a big winding race through the magical realm between Shinji and Sabrina. And I thought that Shinji and Sabrina's back and forth was just, I guess I want to say juvenile. I mean, they are children, but it just seemed needlessly combative.
Yeah, I would agree. I also that the whole fantasy sequence part of it, I was immediately put off, because I've always liked the teenage witch aspect, the learning to be human or the interacting with humans, and then they started referring to her as a princess.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, since when is she a princess? And I'm okay with, that change if it's good for the story and if they explain it, but there's no real mention of any of it. It felt like they were like, oh, we hope Disney people will like us too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. They brought in the Enchantress character, and I don't know if we found out at that point that Shinji was her son, or whether we found that out later. I found that out later and and wrote it down.
Yeah, it was later, and that kind of affects the first scene. So I would think that would be something that we should know earlier.
And the characterization of Shinji itself, it's been a little while since I've read the Sabrina books with him in it, at least the manga stuff that I've read, and I don't think he's been in other stuff. And maybe he has been, I just don't remember. The relationship between them just seemed so harsh, I guess, compared to what I'm used to, I guess. And
yes.
Maybe I'm misremembering it, but I remembered them, definitely there was a little bit of a edge to their relationship, but it was in some ways very flirtatious, but I don't want to, become powerless to him or to her or whatever,
Well, and making him Enchantress's son was, I thought, a good idea, a way to bring together sort of some of the 70s aspects and some of the, more modern aspects. But it was yet another aspect that I wish someone had sort of been clearer about introducing to the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry. To answer your question, John, Shinji was used heavily in Tanya Del Rio stuff, but was, I believe, created by Holly G in the series just before that. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Johanna.
No, that was all I was saying. He was a much nicer character, if I'm remembering properly, in the manga part. But then I seem to remember the manga stories were more conflicts, sort of, the characters solving a problem, not fighting with each other.
Yeah.
So when I was trying to think of an antagonist from the manga run, I couldn't remember one. I mean, there might be, and I'm just not recalling it. Mm-hmm. But the stories were sort of differently structured, and this was very me versus you in several different ways. I mean, there was the stab at making the sort of bad girl character who's jealous of Sabrina liking another boy and all that. Mm-hmm. Which again is something of a cliche, but I'm willing to forgive cliches when you're looking at specifically teen-oriented material, because there's only so many stories you can do.
Yeah, so leaving the magical realm, following the plot of the episode, she leaves the magical realm on a broomstick, which becomes a scooter and crashes into her house, where we are then introduced, what we see for the first time, her aunts, which are, of course, a huge part of the character. We established that her parents are gone. We established that Salem's there. One of the things I took away from this episode was how her time spent on the scooter was terrifying. Like, she's constantly crashing the thing, and it didn't seem slapstick enough to be funny. It just seemed like out of control and dangerous. But we establish in that scene that there's a relationship between Salem and the Enchantress, and that the Enchantress has something on Salem, and is sort of blackmailing him to be destructive in Sabrina's life.
Make her hate the mortal realm and decide, okay, I'm going to stay full time at Witch World. You know. But yeah, it took me a while to figure out what was going on there, why he was, doing these little tricks to cause trouble.
Well, and that brought up something where I felt like I could kind of follow along because I already knew who all these characters were, mm-hmm. but they weren't the characters I knew. I kind of wonder about people who didn't have that background, if they could even follow along with who all these people were and why they should care. And even so, knowing the characters, they've done different things with them. Like, the cute boy is not Harvey. Harvey is the geek boy. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just thought they weren't aiming well at people who were already familiar with the character, but they weren't aiming well at people who were new to the character either.
Yeah, and now that we've, in the first, 5 or 6 minutes of the episode, we've established the magical realm, and they've shown us a bunch of characters there, and then they've brought in Sabrina's home life, which is a whole other batch of characters and different motivations and stuff, and then we head to human school, again on the scooter, and then we're introduced to a whole other batch of characters, and there we meet. I've completely forgotten Sabrina's friend's name, who seems to be in on her witchiness.
Jess?
Well, sorry?
I think her name is Jess.
Okay.
I didn't catch anybody's name. I couldn't tell you who the ants' names were.
Yeah.
No.
I think at one point...
I was just going to say, the only reason I caught some of the names was I think they mentioned them like once, maybe within the episode, and I was purposely looking for them at the second time I watched the show with the closed captioning on.
Smart. Yeah, the friend reminded me of, again, another Tania Del Rio character. There was a plant witch that she hung out with, who also provided some visual diversity, who was great. So yay for her to have a friend. That's nice. But you're right. I thought there were way too many characters running around.
Yeah, and we're introduced to Jim. I wrote this in my notes. It was just like Jim underline, like, who's Jim? Like, like Johanna, you seem to have a background with this character, perhaps beyond mine and John's for sure. Is Jim an established character?
You mean the cute boy?
Yeah.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting choice to. I mean, and this is what I thought about, is maybe later in the season they're going to develop Shinji into a love interest like he is in the books. But it seemed odd to have Shinji as this really villainous, like straight, like black and white villainous character, and then have two love interests in the human realm.
Mm-hmm. And one of those, the more traditional love interest, Harvey, she's totally not that into. I mean, she's almost obligated to be with him because of what happens to him, becoming the werewolf. Or
Yeah. I guess let's get into that. Did anyone understand the plot device of
I was thinking about that. That just seemed like this kind of out of nowhere thing, like these cursed clothing. I mean, it almost was like that Friday the 13th show from the 80s where they had the antique store with all the cursed items, and they have these magically cursed clothing from, I don't know, from the witch or the magical realm or whatever, and they have to de-curse them or whatever before they can sell them to the unsuspecting population.
Why would you even set that up as a business? I don't know. Now, now that you put it the way you phrased it, Jonathan, I can kind of see way back, Harvey used to be a figure of fun for Sabrina's aunts to, like, turn into a turkey or whatever. So they could be kind of alluding to that aspect of it. He'd say something and tick off one of the ants, and she'd, like, magic him, and then it was like, oh, you have to put him back and make sure he doesn't remember, kind of thing.
Yeah, those are stories we pretty commonly get in the digests now, of just them just toying with Harvey.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I'm used to, like on the TV show, Harvey seemed like a nice kid.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and Harvey might still be the most redeeming character of this show for sure. I liked him the most.
Well, except he's presented as very stereotypically geeky. I want to do this werewolf thing, and nobody else wants to do it with me, but I know how. Just
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was sort of not not a portrayal that I immediately recognized from any of the other sources.
Yeah, so we've got the magic clothing, which is a weird plot device. I don't know. I'm a little worried that that's going to be something moving ahead, that we're going to end up with a sort of Monster of the Week situation where people are going to put on magical clothing and be changed in different ways.
Is anybody else thinking Buffy around now? I mean, because Buffy had the whole Seth Green playing Oz as a werewolf that they had to chain up once a month, and they also had the Halloween episode where you became whatever your costume was.
I mean, I'm not familiar with Buffy, but it is clear that they're pulling from a lot of different pop culture sources for sure.
True.
Yeah, I saw Twilight echoes too with the whole let's go see the movie about the werewolf kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we then get a scene between the princess, the enchantress rather, and Shinji, in which we learn, and one of you may have to help me out with this, we learn the enchantress's motivations for wanting to mess with Sabrina, because she wants Sabrina to stay in the human realm or stay in the magic realm. No, I'm confused.
She wants her to come back to the magical realm.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, no, that's why she was having Salem create chaos for her in Greendale, so that she would get fed up in that realm and come back permanently. Because she implied it had to do with her power, but I don't know if that was like actual magical power or her actual like more metaphorical power over the students and all that stuff. But ultimately she wants Sabrina and Shinji together, even though they don't like each other.
Well, there's some reference to Sabrina's eventually going to rule Magic World, right?
Exactly, because she's like the future queen.
Okay. I admit I lost track of this, and part of it was because it was just so ugly I did not care.
Well, and that's where the second watching of it was really helpful for me, just to sit there and rewatch it and say, okay, I'm not quite getting why they did that,
I admire your stamina in getting through it twice.
So we've established the Enchantress. We understand, hopefully, a little better why she is working with Salem or manipulating Salem. And we then move on to, I guess, the overarching plot for the episode, which is that Harvey has become a werewolf, wants to go to the werewolf movie, and there's ostensibly like a third act like chase scene of Sabrina chasing Harvey through the town.
the thing that bugged me about that thing, Harvey the werewolf kept on she kept on tracking him down, and he would rear up and howl or whatever, and she would blast him away, and then she'd chase him again, and then she'd blast him away again. And I was like, well, why aren't you just capturing him or blast him at least towards the house,
Well, later she gets smart and she gives him cookies. I like that part. I was like, yes, follow the food.
Yeah, John, I thought the exact same thing. Was that it just seemed like a really easy device to have her shoot him off, and he'd fly off into another building, and then she'd go and chase him.
Yeah, and later she used her power to basically. I don't remember if it was her or Shinji that made him kind of froze, how telekinetics will hold people in the air and all that. I mean, they did that, and I'm like, well, why didn't you do that at the beginning?
Because then we wouldn't have 10 more minutes of animation.
Exactly.
That's exactly how it played out. Yeah. In the midst of this, Sabrina and Jim have a moment where they sort of admit that they like each other while she's trying to save him from Harvey. And there's that sort of ridiculousness where everyone thinks that Harvey is in an amazing werewolf costume.
Sorry.
When he burst into the party, did either of you think about the Afterlife with Archie ending with Jughead bursting into the dance there?
Totally.
I'm sure it had no. I mean, it just happened that they came out at the same time, but I'm sure it had no connection. But
it goes back. It goes back to every teen dance with a monster. I mean, Buffy, Carrie, all of it.
Yeah, it's certainly.
It's interesting too that they in both settings they're like, oh, you look at that cool costume,
I was more interested in the fact that apparently the entire school dance consists of 8 people.
That's true. I mean, when you're dealing with computer animation, I mean, you're paying by how many sets you have to build, how many modeled characters you have to have, and stuff. So unfortunately, there were definitely times when scenes were, underpopulated, and when action was just stiff.
Yeah,
I did like the elf boy though.
Yeah, I didn't quite get him. I didn't like his voice. The voice seemed really odd. But yeah, he was interesting, and he seemed to be having fun.
Oh yeah, this was. Oh, go ahead.
And I'm kind of a sucker for these. What is this Earthworld kind of characters?
Yeah, that's within the plot. Shinji and this elf boy. He's the blonde guy. We're talking about the same guy.
Yeah, the blonde guy in the Robin Hood hat and the green shirt. Yeah, that's why I'm calling him an elf boy.
Yeah. So we'll call him elf boy for the for the sake of conversation. But Shinji and this elf boy show up as well. And I'm not entirely sure on their motivation other than to sort of raise the stakes. But it seemed to me just too early in the season for the witch world and the human world to be sort of wrapped up like that. And there was already so much going on in the episode.
Shinji was mad that Sabrina wouldn't go to the dance with him, that she wanted to go to this other thing instead. It was jealousy.
And he was almost trying to drag her to the dance. If I'm not mistaken, what he was trying to do.
Yeah, because he was going to be king and she was going to be queen of whatever this witch world dance thing was, and he couldn't show up without a queen. That would look bad. Sorry, slipping into Ballet Girl there.
So
they had a Riverdale reference, I noticed.
Yes.
I caught that.
Yep, I wrote that down. It was a stupid fanboy moment. It's just like in the Josie and the Pussycats movie when they mentioned Riverdale. I was like, what?
But now that you mention that, I realized why it's weird for me to call this guy Jim. Because in the earlier Sabrina cartoon where they were all really big-headed kids,
mm-hmm.
if I'm remembering properly, the dark-haired bad girl was named Jim, Gem.
Oh. Huh.
Yeah. Anyway.
So Shinji and Sabrina have a battle of sorts where there's a little bit of I don't know what you would call it. It seems like in the magic realm, werewolves are sort of like oppressed people, and she was trying to explain to Shinji that here on, in the human realm, that they're not, that they're vicious. Did this make sense to you guys?
Well, there's an earlier reference from the ants when the ants say something about human werewolves being really bad monsters. So I kind of got the impression that maybe in Witch World they were more like pets.
Yeah.
It definitely wasn't spelled out as much as you would have liked, especially if it had significance. But.
Yeah. So also, I thought the episode, looking back, I don't remember how the episode wrapped up. Like I remember, I don't know how it wrapped up in terms of action. I remember it wrapped up with poor Harvey being out in front of his house in torn up clothes, and Sabrina. Yeah, and Sabrina, sort of winding this yarn about how what had happened and where he had been and everything, and the episode and the episode sort of wrapped up there.
I think she zapped Shinji back to the magical world after he tried to do the same thing to her.
Yeah, and then Elf Boy comes running in because he was late for his curfew.
Yeah, but it was the best dance ever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, okay, so did y'all actually see that part? Because on my airing, they actually clipped that. So he starts to say best, and then they shrink the credit box and start running a promo for something?
Yeah, Saturday, I watched it Saturday, and yeah, it got cut off. I actually had a little note here about that. But then on Sunday, when I watched it with my boy, it did not get cut off.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and that's a good question, John. What did your son think of it?
He, he kind of watched it. He laughed when he thought it was really the funniest part that he reacted to. The big reaction I got was when the werewolf was in the cage. Harvey was in the cage, and he sneezed, and all the snot went out on the cat. He thought that was, or on Sabrina, I think it was, and he thought that was hilarious. So this is my 20-year-old boy.
I was going to say, and how old is this child?
Yeah.
Granted, he has some mental disabilities, but he thought that was hilarious. But, and I mean, there was stuff like that. I'm sure that, those things always seem to appeal to people and kids. I have to admit, I chuckled a little bit too with them. But
so, final thoughts on this? Do we go around with a thumbs up or thumbs down? Any final thoughts on the series on the whole?
Well, there was one part of it I liked.
Yeah, let's do that.
Which was the sort of cut paper / sketchy look of the credit sequence.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this going, wow, why couldn't they have done the show like that? Because it doesn't match at all the rest of the show, but it looks really distinctive and really, I thought, neat.
Yeah,
I did like that a lot.
Yeah, actually, I realized that I hadn't paid any attention to the opening theme song because I was watching the opening credits. I almost got like a Charlie and Lola vibe from that. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
Mm-mm. I don't know. I mean, there's little things that I like, but nothing that really stands out. I mean, I think there's promise for more. I guess what I would hope for in the future would be maybe episodes that are going to just be, episodes that would just be focused on some adventure within the witch magical realm, or just some a little bit more basic stories that could maybe flesh out all of those characters that were so hard to kind of learn about and keep track of this first episode.
Yeah, so an episode in which Sabrina has to balance these things as opposed to the audience having to balance these things.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true enough. I mean, I'm thinking of some sitcoms recently that I've come to really like, and they all took a number of episodes, almost half a season to get going, some of them. So, I don't know that this was really a pilot. It almost felt like you could just stick it in the rotation of the show. So it may be that they didn't want to do sort of an introductory kind of pilot episode and just have people pick it up as they go along. So it's entirely possible that once they get more episodes, or we see more episodes if they already exist, that it does kind of calm down and settle out.
Okay, so going in a circle, Johanna, first, thumbs up, thumbs down?
You would have to pay me to watch this again. I did not care for it. I didn't find the plot interesting. Found the characters overwhelming. Did not care for the look of it, which is an important thing in a cartoon.
John, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Oh, it wasn't the best. It was a mild thumbs down. I will definitely watch it again just because I like the franchise and I kind of want to see if they do. I want to see what they can do and see if it gets a little better as the show ages a little bit. Wishy-washy.
Yeah, I know. Ever the optimist. I'm going to give it my reluctant thumbs up. Having said that, I don't feel inclined to watch future episodes. I think if there is a DVD collection down the road, I might sit down and try to get through a number of them and see how the story develops. I am giving them the benefit of the doubt. I am giving them a thumbs up. There is enough stuff that I liked in there. I tend to really try to recognize that I'm not the
yeah.
I'm not the intended audience of it and give it a little leeway that way.
That's a great point. Yeah.
But having said that, I was not thrilled with the first episode. I thought they packed in too much, but I will check out future episodes down the line. I'm definitely not something I'm going to be jumping at from week to week for sure.
I do find it interesting. I will find it interesting to see that if this becomes a moderate success, however they define it, if we start seeing Sabrina comics in its style.
I would love to. Well, I don't know if I'd like that, but.
Yeah, I mean that was the problem with the previous animated series. It's like, hey, we're doing new original Sabrina stories, but she looks like this really large-headed kid.
Yeah, totally. Does anyone know what the ratings look like for this?
I actually was just looking at a web page just now. They said that the ratings actually were pretty well. They did pretty well. It seemed to be says that it earned year-to-year time period delivery gains amongst basically every population, every age group. So it did fairly well. I don't know how much the numbers mean, and I don't know what they seem to be promoting it. That and that R.L. Stein's show both did really well, so they were kind of really touting that as far as ratings for the show.
Well, the Hub is also gearing up some specific Halloween-aimed programming. They're doing like a Halloween party special and kind of stuff. So it's a good time of year for it to debut. And that may be why we got the type of episode that we did with the Halloween party theme. So,
yeah, and also if you're creating an animated series aimed at young girls, the same network as My Little Pony is not a bad place to do it.
True.
So, on the whole, disappointing, I guess. But well, I'm
that I'd hoped for, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm still hopeful. I'm still gonna give it a try.
Awesome. Johanna, not so much.
I've just got too much to watch for me to sort of sit through that because of the character.
Totally. Okay, well, thanks for being part of the episode, you guys. Thanks for coming on and talking about this. Would be not nearly as much fun to ramble on about on my own. So, Johanna Draper-Carlson, we can find your writing over at comicsworthreading.com.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was great to talk about it with you.
Cool, yeah, and head over to comicsworthreading.com. You're updating that daily, it seems.
That's what I aim for, yeah. It averages out that way.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, and I mean, you write some about Archie, but you really have a wide...
Well, I aim to be sort of one of the people that still covers all aspects of comics, superhero, art books, manga. I do have a specific Archie comics category, so if people are interested only in that, they can grab a feed for just that category of stuff.
Yep. Well, Archie is part of a balanced breakfast of comics, for sure. And John, we find your writing over at johntroughton.blogspot.com.
Yep. I used to write about a lot of different types of comics. Now it's been mainly Archie stuff recently, and I'm not quite sure why that is. The other stuff hasn't been as interesting to me as late.
Yeah, and you've been writing up about the Riverdale Rescue game as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping to write more about that game soon, just kind of little tidbits of things that I enjoy and some of the things that have surprised me about the game. And
oh, is that the iPad thing?
Yeah.
I've been meaning to try that.
I found it quite addictive.
Oh, good.
Yeah, if you don't have time for cartoons, you definitely do not have time to get sucked into that game. But
I'll have to go check out his writings about it so I can find out more.
Yeah, totally. So thanks again, you guys, for coming on the show.
No problem. I hope to do it again sometime.
A great way to help out the show is to listen to the show every week, is to write an email and be a part of the show. A great way to help out the show is to head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show and write a review. And tell your friends, all your friends who are into Archie comics, about the show, and really help to be a part of it and make it a cool community. Another way to help out the show is to head over to RiverdalePodcast.com and click on those links. Click on that link to audible.com. Get yourself a free audiobook of your choice. You can also click on the links on RiverdalePodcast.com and head over to TFAW, Things from Another World. That is a gigantic comic book shop right at your fingertips. You can do pre-ordering there. You can order trade paperbacks. You can order single issues. You can order statues and T-shirts and busts and everything else. Anything you would get from your comic shop, you can get from TFAW at great prices. So if you want to help out the show, you can head over to RiverdalePodcast.com, click on that link for Things from Another World, and anything you purchase there will benefit the show. A percentage of that purchase will go to keep the lights on here at the Riverdale Podcast. So thanks for considering that. On the way out, I want to remind everyone to head over to RiverdalePodcast.com. There you'll see the cover to the crazy Madhouse number 96, our book of the week this week. You'll also find links to all the news stories that we discussed in the news portion of the show. Cool stuff going on in the world of Archie comics. Over at RiverdalePodcast.com, you will find links to like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter. You'll also find links to subscribe to the show on iTunes. And if you're listening on iTunes, writing a review is a great way to help out the show. ArchieFans.com forumite Betty Reggie, big fan of the show, wrote a review for the iTunes, wrote a review in iTunes this past week. So I want to give a special thanks to her for making that happen. Thanks so much. Also on RiverdalePodcast.com, you will find a link to send us an email. You can send emails to RiverdalePodcast@yahoo.com. Any questions, thoughts, concerns, criticism, any questions you have, you can send that way. RiverdalePodcast@yahoo.com. Riverdale Podcast is part of the First Comics News family. Head over to firstcomicsnews.com. Check out all of their great articles, podcasts, tons of news coming out from New York Comic Con. They have folks there reporting back the news. Good stuff going on over at firstcomicsnews.com. So that is the show this week. I want to thank, again, my guests for the show, John Troughton and Johanna Draper-Carlson. Head over to their sites, johntroughton.blogspot.com and comicsworthreading.com, respectively. They're both doing great work, and we're sweet enough to come on and talk about Sabrina cartoons on my little podcast. So, cool stuff from them. I guess that's going to do it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. Again, my name is Jonathan, and I'll see you again next week here in lovely Riverdale, USA.